Thousands of people are losing their jobs due to the failure of the economy. Factories are closing, mom and papa stores are closing, and the first person that feels it is usually the employee. We'll talk about that next on Due Process with a lawyer who specializes in termination of employment.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
Don't just reject convention. Drown it out. Introducing the all-new 2013 Lexus LS F-Sport, an entirely new pursuit.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.
Well, thank you. I'm Henry Baskin, your host for this edition of Due Process. We're going to be talking to an employment lawyer. His name is Joe Golden, who is one of the top people in the field, talking about the crisis that we're all facing with people losing their jobs, factories closing, and other areas sending work out to be done in other countries. Joe, welcome to Due Process. I appreciate you coming down.
Thank you for inviting me.
You know, you are considered one of the top employment lawyers. I should say you protect people from being wrongfully terminated and things such as that. Before we get into it, I just wonder if you could help us with a few issues that have become, well, there's some notoriety given to what we call the right to work, or I should say unions, collective bargaining agreements and things such as that.
Sure.
Can you tell me something about that? What does the right to work mean?
Okay. Right to work really doesn't mean right to work. Right to work is related completely as to whether the union can force you under any conditions to pay dues to the organization so that the organization can represent you either in collective bargaining or other efforts in terms of wages, hours, and working conditions. It doesn't have anything to do with the right of people to organize and to be part of a union, but it has everything to do with once you have voted in the union, whether you have to pay to support the activities of the union.
Well, why is this a right to work? Everyone has a right to work.
It's not a right to work. Right to work is a misnomer. It means you have a right to work in a shop that is unionized without having to pay union dues while you get the benefits of the collective bargaining agent.
Well, how is that going to work for people who are working in what we used to call them closed shops, where you had to belong to the union in order to work at a certain automotive factory?
That's right.
You had to belong to it, or they couldn't hire you. Is that right?
That's right. If there certain shops, if you weren't a member of a union, you couldn't work there because being a member of the union was a condition of employment.
Okay. For example, we have the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, AFTRA, and some stations say that you have to be a member or you can't be on their air and you can't appear on their television. And some say you don't have to be. Now, I don't know why there's this dichotomy. I mean, apparently people vote if they want a union or don't.
Okay. First they vote if they want a union. Once the union is in, the union becomes the agent that bargains collectively with the employer.
For everyone.
For everyone.
Okay. So if you have legislation that says you have the right to work, you have a right not to join a union and work at this factory, any benefits the union gets go to everyone, or just to the union members?
Not joining the union. You are a member of the bargaining
You're a
unit.
member, but you don't have to pay
member of the
dues.
bargaining unit. You don't have to pay dues. You get the benefits of being a member of the union, which is why right to work will decimate unions eventually. You're going to have a few people who on principle are paying to be
Right.
represented. You've got a majority of the people who can opt not to pay to be represented, and obviously, after a while, you're not going to be able to sustain the union because there's not going to be enough funding.
Well, why would someone want to pay dues to get a benefit when they're going to get a benefit anyways?
They're not, and that's what's going to kill the unions based upon right-to-work legislation. You can't operate with only a small fraction, if any, of the people who first voted you in. Remember, hasn't got anything to do with the right to collective bargaining. You have a right federally and under state law to bargain to gain a representative by voting in a union.
Right.
Right to work steps in once you've done that, because if you can't support the union, the fact that you voted it in is of no consequence. It can't survive.
So the expression solidarity forever doesn't really apply anymore
No.
under that kind of situation.
No. And right to work is a complete misnomer.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens, won't we, Joe?
We will see.
Let me turn to the termination aspects. A lot of people come to you and say, look, my boss said I'm through and wants me to leave, wants me to accept some separation pay and go see human resources and things such as that. How do they determine who's being terminated? And I'm talking about without reason. Somebody says, hey, my business is down, I have to fire you.
Okay.
Where do you come in?
I come in at some point in this process, and let me explain the various points where I might come in. Okay. First of all, when people do come to me, the first thing that they say is, they can't do this to me, can they? And of course, they can. We're an at-will state. At-will means that your employment relationship is such, unless you have a union with a union contract, unless you have a personal services contract, which people who make a lot of money oftentimes have their own contract, hired for X amount of time and X amount of money.
Yeah,
okay. Or governmental employees, civil service offers you some protection. To be you can't be fired without good cause.
Okay.
But a majority of the people can be fired for good cause, bad cause, or no cause. 50 states, one state, Montana, is an exception to that rule. They have a statute that allows for termination only for just cause.
Only for a reason. I mean,
just reason, not just any reason.
okay, but you're saying in Michigan,
You're at
you can
will.
be fired at will for anything,
Yes.
any reason.
Yes, except there's always exceptions to the general rule. You've got discrimination laws, both state and federal discrimination laws, which protect you from being fired for gender discrimination, race discrimination.
Well, how can you prove gender discrimination? I mean, I have 3 women here, 3 men there. You mean I have to fire 1 man and 1 woman?
No, no. But if gender plays a significant factor in the determination of who goes,
Right.
then it's discriminatory.
It's discriminatory.
It must be a major factor in the decision-making process.
So that you call wrongful termination.
That you would label wrongful termination based on a discriminatory motive.
Okay, how do you get behind it? How do you find out? Someone said, look, I had to fire this employee because I can't afford to pay him or her. Well, they come to you and they say, look, I'm 70 years old and I got fired. Is that discrimination because younger people are there and older people are being fired?
It could be discrimination. Let's say that you're 70 years old and you're working someplace and there's 5 people who do what you do.
Right.
You've been doing it the longest. And there's usually some evaluation process over the course of time where employers, try to rank or rate the people who work for them.
Right.
It's an annual evaluation process.
Right.
Okay. Let's say you're right in the middle. You're like 3rd from the top of the 5 people, all of whom are doing the same thing, but you're the oldest. Why is it you? How come you're not the worst performer, but you're the oldest.
So that's age discrimination.
We would argue that any explanation that the employer makes, given the fact that your ranking is up there, is pretextual. The real reason has to do with your age.
Okay, we have age, and what other kinds of wrongful termination do we run into?
Disability discrimination, gender discrimination. In Michigan, height and weight
Are you serious?
are issues of discrimination.
Well, if someone is obese, you can be fired,
No, if someone is obese and gets fired,
right?
and there are no real reasons associated with that firing
Except
from a
their wage.
rule standard or a performance standard, and comments have been made about their weight, there
Well,
may be a claim.
well, here's what's happening. In some of the large corporations, they are trying to get rid of their older and more expensive employees and bring in younger, less expensive people. Now, how can they do that without being discriminatory?
Well, the courts are mixed.
Okay,
I would argue if someone came to me and said, of course I'm the highest paid. I've been there for 20 years.
right.
Of course the person who's been there for 2 years isn't going to be making as much money as I am. But the reality is they're trying to make systematically their workforce younger.
Well, but
It's got nothing to do with performance.
right.
It's got nothing to do with rules violation. I'm a great worker, but I'm the oldest.
Okay, well, we have situations where our population is getting older. We have
And working.
100-year-old people, and they're working, but they can be terminated for other reasons that you say are non-discriminatory.
Right.
Okay.
Let's say there's a true reduction in force. You've got to cut 10% of your workforce.
How do you do that? How do you find them?
The way that employers are doing it is that they are now being very, very careful in light of the discrimination laws and in light of the fact that there's a lot of people like me practicing that workers come to.
And you're going to sue those people.
I'm going to sue them if, in fact, there's a valid claim to sue on.
Right.
I'm going to sue them.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
That's the investigatory aspect of this practice.
we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I want you to tell me something about some of the more interesting cases that you've had and the reasons why you've been able to reverse or get damages for the people who've been terminated.
All right, fine.
We'll be right back right after this, right here on Due Process.
Legal referrals and more information on this and other related topics are available on our website at www.dueprocess.tv. There you'll find information on today's program, helpful hints to legal issues, support materials, and lawyer referrals. You can also stream previous episodes of Due Process.
We're back in Due Process talking to Joe Golden about wrongful termination or termination of employees. You know, Joe, I have situations with clients who have contracts for a term of years, locked in, say, 4 or 5 year contract, the pay is stated. They can only be fired for what they call cause. Can you just briefly tell us what cause is?
Sure. When you talk about just cause, you're talking about a valid reason for ending someone's employment without any tinges of discrimination.
Right. Okay.
Failure to follow rules. Performance standards are not being met. Warnings that have not been addressed by the employee. The best way, let me take the other side of the coin from what I do every day.
Okay.
The thing that bothers me the most, that forces me to turn down more cases than anything, is a paper trail. You've got an employee who's warned, and the progression is that the second time they're warned, it may be, first time may be a verbal warning, second time may be a written warning. It's called progressive discipline.
Right.
The penalties go up until you get to termination. It's supposed to give the employee an opportunity to right the wrong or to rectify the problem that he's having.
Well,
Once you've got a paper trail and you can show that the employer progressively was trying to maintain the employment, but because of continuous rules or performance violations, it didn't happen, ultimately you've got a justifiable termination.
okay, we had a situation in Detroit where a broadcaster was terminated because she was dating someone involved in the Kilpatrick's, mashup, and they said, well, we don't want you dating that person. She continued to do that. Her name was in the paper, and they even took pictures of her with that person until they forced her out of her job. And she had a no cause, she couldn't be fired except for cause, and she was fired. So, I mean, that's the kind of case you would take, wouldn't that?
Well, the argument was that this is something that is outside of your workplace.
Right.
That has no impact whatsoever. There's the argument, I'm sure. It would have impact on your reporting and your perspective because the station would claim this would skew your view of an important case that you're dealing with.
Well, and part of the contract says that you'll behave in a reasonable manner publicly. You won't do anything to disparage the station or bring shame upon yourself. It's things such as that.
That's the catch-all phrase.
Yeah, the catch-all phrase. It's
Right.
in there. And then people come to you and say, well, I've been terminated. They're giving me $3,000 and they want me to sign this paper that I will not sue them.
And I won't talk about them.
And will not say anything about it. Right. Is that a legal document? Can they?
It's a legal document if you sign it.
If you sign it, you're stuck, right?
If you sign it, you've made a contract. They made you an offer, you accepted it. These are the terms of the offer.
Mm-hmm.
You've accepted it. You're not forced to accept it. It's voluntary on your part.
Well, but if you don't, you're going to be fired. They say, we're going to let you go regardless. We just want you to sign this paper that you won't disparage us after you leave.
They're basically trying to buy off any legal claim.
Right.
The disparagement is part of it, but the release of all claims is the major part of it.
Okay, and you advise people to seek counsel before they do that.
They usually put something like that right in the agreement.
Oh, yes.
Because there's the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, which is an amendment to the Federal Age Act that says that when someone is over 40, you always do this, okay? You have to tell them that they should seek counsel.
Right.
They have 21 days to review the document.
Right. I've seen the 21
and 7 days to retract after they sign.
Okay.
That's all part of the federal law.
Well, what's the deal? You talk about federal law, and I don't want to digress, except to say that all state court judges have to retire at the age of 70, or they can't run for office after they're 70 years old. But we can have 90-year-old federal court judges.
And do.
And that's absolutely
We
correct,
do.
and we do. Well, do you think that's fair, just to arbitrarily say 70 years old, you're mentally incompetent, and you can't judge things fairly?
Well, as someone who's still practicing past that point, I would say no, of course.
Right, you would say no. And everybody else who's living to 90 and 100 years old would say no.
Right.
I mean, why can a federal judge be 80 years old making decisions while a state court judge in Michigan has to leave after 70?
Well, that's the way the legislature has set this up, and until somebody is willing to take a stand and get the law changed, there's going to be that divergence between state and federal.
Yeah, they did bring a case. The judges did bring a case saying there was age discrimination, but they lost it somewhere. I mean, they just couldn't get the courts to pass on it. And you would think that they'd want to pass on a law like that.
Maybe if the court were different, the decision would be different.
Depends who the court is.
Exactly.
And I know. Tell me about some of your cases, Joe, that you've had where there was wrongful termination.
Okay. What we see a lot, the most obvious cases, are cases of sexual harassment and sex discrimination, where there is a relationship between the employee and a member of the employment team, or the boss, or the employer. Oftentimes what you run into is you run into a relationship, voluntary, of course, on both parts, consensual on both sides, that goes bad. Now, the woman still needs the job,
Right.
even though the relationship is over. But her boss doesn't see the relationship overall as being the same
And doesn't want her there.
and doesn't want her there, or has been rejected, or something else has happened that strains the relationship, so that becomes the real basis for the decision to terminate or the decision to force somebody out. Where in reality, that's a protected activity in the law to be able to say to somebody, no, I don't want to have a relationship with you anymore, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to continue the employment relationship.
Have you brought those cases to trial?
We've brought a number of those cases to
They're sort of embarrassing to the person who remains on the job, or the boss, I should say, whatever it is. I'm trying to think of, there have been a lot of cases reported. Recently, there's a case where there's a flight attendant who's suing for sexual intimidation, things such as that. She's suing someone locally. Would that come under the wrongful termination thing?
It would come under the wrongful termination thing if the employer was instrumental in coming up with the reason for termination, or if the employer was influenced to terminate the employee by some outside force.
Right.
Let me explain. Oftentimes, you've got an employer who might be beholden to his or her vendors, his or her customers, his or her clients.
Right.
So that outside, that third person, could influence the actions of the employer with regard to the employee. At that point in time, it's a wrongful dismissal. But if that person is an employee at will, then that person's claim goes against the person who has the influence, not against the employer.
Okay. Tell me, how do you get compensation when you're wrongfully terminated because of your gender, because of your ethnicity, because of your age, whatever? How do you get compensated? What is a compensation? What are you asking for? Dollars for a continuation of employment? Or punitive damages? How do you do that?
You've got a number of areas where you can seek dollar amounts.
Right.
First of all, when you've been terminated, at that point in time, your salary basically is X amount of dollars, your benefits are X amount of dollars.
Right.
You can calculate how much money you've lost.
Okay, but you got to put a term of years on it, though.
You put a term of years on it, which is something that is very speculative.
Right.
And it's a matter of proof. What kind of an opportunity do you have to find other work? If you find other work, are you going to be able to replace that degree of salary? Are the benefits going to be the same? Is there a pension? What's the possibility of being promoted?
So that's all.
What does the rest of your life look like?
It's all put into.
What about emotional distress? Some people handle this better than others. If you don't handle it very well and you can show that it's created a medical problem, you may have a claim for emotional distress.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, if you're terminated wrongfully in your mind and you have a family to take care of, I guess it's emotional.
It is emotional. Plus the fact you spend more hours of your working day going to, coming from, and in the course of your employment than anything else, including time with your family.
Right.
So this is your life. Many people are known by what they do.
I imagine the employers are getting, with their human resource people, are being very careful about it. But I've seen people marched out of a building, came in, didn't know they were being fired that day, and were terminated.
And marched out by design.
Right.
Management books all say the same thing. Once you decide to fire, get them out of there as quickly as you can. Don't let them talk to anybody. Don't let them ask any questions. And if they ask questions, don't answer them.
And that goes on a daily
all the
basis.
Time. Right. By design.
They march
by
you out.
design.
So your advice, Joe, as we have to wrap up, is that, if you question your termination, see a lawyer, talk to a lawyer. I mean, you talk to dozens of people every week, don't you?
I take one case out of every 30 people I see.
But they do get the right to get some legal advice from you, right?
That's right.
So
Absolutely.
people should feel free to call JoJo, and you'll give them the answer. But,
I'll try.
But the prognosis for this is not good, as I see more and more jobs being lost, plants closing, and work being shipped overseas.
There is one thing that is starting to raise its head that's been talked about by lawyers for the last 30 years. There is legislation that is being considered
To protect, I'm going to cut it short, to protect employees.
to protect them by giving them job security after they've been employed with a single employer.
Major
For a
funding
year.
for due process is provided by Mead Lexus of Southfield and Mead Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
Don't just reject convention. Drown it out. Introducing the all-new 2013 Lexus LS F Sport, an entirely new pursuit.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.